Today we're going to be chatting about end-to-end metadata management. And I would like to welcome you to today's session, Aggregate Data Management and Optimization. Our guests today are Chris Comstock and Nate Woodman. Chris is the Chief Product Officer here at Clarivine. Over the past 15 years, he's worked as a consultant, brand and product leader for a variety of top companies, and currently he is in charge of Clarivine's product division. Nate Woodman is an ad tech industry leader and measurement expert. He is the founder of Proof, a consultancy that helps clients plan and deploy measurement and optimization solutions that address the anonymous web. Throughout his career, Nate has worked for various ad tech startups, consulting, and advertising companies. Today, they'll be going through another Q&A style discussion, answering questions in regards to setbacks, responses to recent platform changes, and how to get started with metadata management. And for now, I will hand it over to Chris and Nate.
All right. Welcome back, our third and final series in the end-to-end measurement. So I know we talked about kind of what's changing and why, what the urgency, organizing data to get to end-to-end data management. Final session, let's talk about now, assuming everything's in place or there's a plan to get that information data in place, how do we take aggregate data management and how can we use that for optimization? So I think kind of starting with the first question I had was what's holding back that automation? What is preventing the ultimate promise of digital marketing automation?
I think we have in the industry, if you're in a if you're an agency or brand, most people are very familiar with you've heard of ad ops, advertising operations, you've heard of marketing ops, right? Ad ops is usually focused on paid media, marketing ops is usually focused on owned media. Right. But then you also have, a category, and you think about the data science aspect, you have ML ops. Right. And so ML ops sits at the end. They think about data pipelines, through the entire process, looking backwards. Right. But you read a lot of statistics around ML ops, and, 80% of the data science time, who's usually a PhD, is spent in cleaning up the information. Right. So I think we still look at ops in silos. There's the marketing ops, there's the ad ops, and there's the ML ops, but fundamentally they're just all ops. Yeah. So the functionality where I think we need to get to as an industry in order to activate optimization, which is fundamentally the job of the data science team, there needs to be coordination between marketing ops, ad ops, and ML ops. So as the campaigns are getting set up at the beginning, right, through the ad operations process, that they're QA'd and checked in a manner that by the time the information arrives, to the optimization, the data science teams, that's effectively QA'd and checked to take away, that to have an accurate, at least metadata pipeline, right, throughout the process, so that the metadata can be used by the machine learning and the optimization teams and the data science teams. And I think that's where we need to get. We need to have coordination and say it's not just, it's not marketing, it's not ads, it's not machine learning, it's just operations, and they need to be coordinated and they need to be the same.
Yeah, it's funny. It reminds me of the year of mobile was the year of mobile for every year for, I don't know, for a decade. Yeah. AI and ML and automation are everyone says they're doing it, but to your point, they spend a lot of I think it's still 80% of time for most data science teams are spent cleaning data, right?
Yeah, same static. Right, exactly. Yeah.
Yeah. So, I mean, I think what's fascinating, and I know we've talked a bunch about this, that, how do we move towards where observation is going away and you get aggregate data? How do you trust that data? How to actually use it across different platforms? And now I think about more recently, Amazon just came out, resurfaced their clean room. Yep. Snowflake just announced their media cloud. You've got, all these other clean rooms. How do digital marketers use taxonomy metadata to translate that aggregate data across different platforms and clean rooms and ultimately their own data lake as well?
Yeah. So you have the purpose of clean rooms is to manage PII, right? Is to manage sensitive information and sensitive data, right? They all have some sort of differential privacy, kind of technique, system in them that makes it so that whether or not they're using some level of aggregation or they're using something, kind of Bloom filters, or, there's all these different processes or kind of different forms of encryption. And it's a very technical, right? There's a very technical distinction between clean room 1, clean room 2, and clean room 3, right? But fundamentally, they're all trying to manage in a highly secure way the combination of PII information for the purpose of targeting, measurement, et cetera, right? Now, some of the issues that arise there are, okay, I put this PI information inside this clean room, but there's multiple clean rooms, right? There's no, if you're thinking about an ecosystem, right? There's obviously the big tech, Google has ADH. You mentioned Amazon just, kind of re-released theirs for a while. I might have missed this. I think Facebook was working with the LiveRamp Safe Haven team, right?
Yep.
I don't know the status of that now, but kind of like you end up with a situation where you have all these different clean rooms used by different people using different technical methodologies, and they don't talk to each other again, right? So if you're a brand that's signed up with Clean Room Company 1, right, and you're using kind of Clean Room Company 2, that you still need to have aggregate data management and metadata management across the board so that you can understand what you put into system 1 and then take out probably in an aggregate format from that same system is in a similar taxonomy to what you put in system 2, right? So you want to kind of look, so Google ADH, right? You might you want to manage what you input there, right, by using this metadata and kind of using the operations process, so that if you take information out of Amazon, right, you can still at the aggregate level still have some comparison of what you executed in Google to what you executed in Amazon. So you still need the metadata layer, even with clean rooms.
Yeah, and so what I think is interesting that I don't feel like it's talked about quite as much is you can still get access to performance data and information, right? It's just at a different non-user based level. And if you understand your inputs and you're connecting it back to your data lake or where your first party data, you can actually understand what's working and what's not working. You're just doing it at a different level. Would you, I mean, is that, yeah, I mean, that's, yeah, and everything's becoming a clean room or a pseudo walled garden, if you will.
Yeah. So, I mean, what you just described is a cohort.
Yeah.
Right? It's grouping as opposed to an individual ID. And I think one way to think about how you handle kind of measurement, tracking, optimization is that, well, if a cohort is a grouping, right, and that grouping is an aggregate, that aggregate usually needs to roll up into a taxonomy, right? So this is where taxonomy management becomes so much more important when you're working with cohorts. Ultimately, what a cohort is, it's really just, if you think of an ID, it's an individual, but that individual has characteristics as to they bought a product this long ago, right? They live in this general area. They, that's all about the individual, right? But really what a cohort is, if you just take a bunch of individuals, right, and you group them together, you go from 1 to say 1,000. That 1,000 still has all the same probabilities. They're just generalized. They have a tendency to live in this area. They have 87% of them bought a product in the last whatever. Those are also parameters and variables that you can use for kind of everything you did, but it's at that grouping level. So I would look at a grouping, versus an individual. A grouping or a cohort is just really a big fat user ID.
Yep.
Yeah, but you can still do things with it.
Yeah, I think I'm trying to think of what was the white paper I read that was it forget what company, but the quote that was interesting, I think, and this was even from a couple of years ago, was they were less worried about the accuracy or precision of what algorithm or model worked, but directionally, how is it impacting their business? And I think that's I think what they were doing and referring to was more where, it's a comfort level, right? To get to, can I trust what I don't see?
Yeah.
And this kind of ties back to everything we've talked about in these series, right? Of like aggregate data experimentation, you've got to understand the inputs, and then we're going to have to trust these outputs and understand how it's impacting ultimately revenue is the ultimate goal.
Yeah, and that's where I think as an industry, that's where the opportunity is, right? Is like marketing and marketing effectiveness with inside an organization sometimes doesn't, a lot of people talk about it, that it's not really considered in the same manner as kind of a financial investment, right? And there's two reasons for that. Well, I think one is the, there's a mistrust of the information, the data, the outputs, right? And I think that permeates the industry. There's because it's like things are they're looked at in silos, things are mistrafficked quite a bit, and you don't really know, kind of there's like a mistrust of the data quality, right?
Yeah.
In addition to kind of a mistrust of whether or not the measurement, methodology is sound.
Yeah.
So we have an opportunity right now to fix those.
Yeah, we hear a lot, like, people know that there's missing data and there's bad data, but they've just accepted it, and so it's like, well, if we're okay with accepting it at the user level, let's, I think this is the opportunity to move and rethink how they think about, some of those measurement methodologies. So I feel like we could talk about this for
Of course.
hours, and have, right? But in the spirit of time, I think the one question that we get asked, or that I get asked quite often, is, this all sounds great. We understand this is happening. We're worried. But the problem is we have a lot of people and a lot of teams, and nobody owns this. So if
Mhm.
someone was wondering, where do you start? How would
Yeah.
you start? How would you respond? Like, what would be the advice for, where do you start with this problem or this change?
Yeah, and so there's something else underlying there that I wanted to mention, right? Um, this problems that we described, as well as these opportunities, are very apparent to people that are day to day, right? That work in the operations process.
Yep.
It's very rarely understood at the executive level, right? Kind of in that someone that can actually make a decision as to group A, B, and C. You need to coordinate amongst each other, right? So I think first, there's a general, there's a executive education, right? That there are fundamental problems, inside the operations projects in most groups, and that they are solvable, right? So that's kind of like, I think, one of the first order problems. It's more of there's an education and awareness, but kind of like outside of that, kind of outside of that, so executive sponsor, kind of like with inside the enterprise. um, I think the other way to think about kind of where do you start, and kind of is to really just, this is an opportunity to reset. I know kind of thinking and kind of about going back to the beginning is scary for a lot of companies, because they think about fundamentally sunk cost and all the investment, time, effort, and energy they put into their existing systems. But kind of that said, it's like there's limited times, kind of within a career or within an organization, that you actually have the opportunity to reset, to put everything that you've done in the past on the table, and to rethink it. And
Yep.
now's that time where we're all being given this opportunity to course correct. And so I think it's a exciting time, to be in our industry again.
Yeah, I couldn't agree more. And I'd say from our customers, where we've seen it work well, there's an assessment phase, which is what I think you touched on, right? Let's see what's working, what's not working, evaluate the technology, the systems, the process. And we spend a lot of time before the software ever gets put in place. But I'd say the one piece I think that you hit on is the most successful for us projects and implementations, or customers that see the most success, is when there is an executive sponsor or a corporate wide initiative
Yeah.
to make this change. And so it really becomes a culture change, right? It's
Yeah.
not just that's traditional, this technology is going to solve the problem. It's more of a people and culture problem that ultimately is
Yeah.
going to change things going forward. So
Yeah.
I think,
Agreed.
with that, appreciate the time. Again, I feel like we could talk about this for hours. And so, it was great to share some of the conversations we've been having with everyone else.
Yeah, and like Chris, like we said at the beginning of this, you and I have been talking about this for months,
Yeah.
right? So it's finally great to kind of get that out into everybody else in the atmosphere. So I appreciate that opportunity. Thank you.
Yeah. Thank you.